Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Swedenborgian Life. Today we're going to be audacious enough to think we can look at and have definitive answers on how to be wise. Our first topics are the pros and cons of facts, the gift of rationality, and wisdom of life. So let's look today at wisdom. It's an idea that's a bit nebulous, but it's present in our culture. There are plenty of proverbs about a wise man and a fool and how they would handle situations differently. We know that it's something to aspire to, and it's not exactly the same as intelligence. But what is it? It's a question that might seem peripheral to some, but not Swedenborg. In fact, he wrote that it is one of the two basic building blocks of everything, and that accepting it is essential to our growth and development as human beings. So if it's that important, how do we get it? Do we enroll in graduate programs, or crack open Wikipedia, or gain as much life experience as we can, or climb a mountain and hope that we encounter some kind of monk up there? Well, the strategy pretty much depends on what wisdom itself is, right? And Swedenborg has some pretty interesting things to say about that. Stay tuned. All right, it's Monday again. I can't believe it. I'm happy, but I just can't believe that it happened again. My name is Curtis, and I'm with the Swedenborg Foundation. It's a nonprofit that tries to get Swedenborg's ideas out into conversation, and that's what we're going to do right now. Helping me today will be Dr. Dan Synnestvedt. He's returning to the show. We're really excited about it. He is Associate Professor of Philosophy at Bernathen College. Doctor, thanks for coming back on the program.
Thanks for having me, Curtis.
Absolutely, my pleasure. So we're going to break this up into 3 segments, as we always do. You guys watching at home, you can participate in the discussion by doing more than just taking a look at what we're saying. You can actually have input. We want you to answer questions or comments that you have in the comment section and get those in, and we'll have a second half of the show where we actually look at those and try to hear your voices on it, because it's cool to hear what everyone has to say. So let's get into our discussion topics. Let's take a look at topic number 1. All right, so number 1 is called The Pros and Cons of Facts, which I thought was a clever title. Some people might not think so, but you'll understand why I put it there once you see this Swedenborg quote here. This is from Secrets of Heaven 4156. Facts are indeed a means toward becoming wise, but they can also be a means towards becoming insane. For people who are leading a good life, facts are a means to becoming wise. But for those leading an evil life, they are a means to becoming insane, since they use facts to support not only a life of evil, but also false assumptions, which they do arrogantly and convincingly, because they believe they are wiser than others. So it's just funny, Swedenborg always has this sort of caricature of the evil, and like, this is what they do, and he's just trying to prove a point by isolating the thing, but I always find that comical. So anyway, what do you make of that quote, and how he's saying facts can either be positive or negative depending on what they do to you?
Right. It's interesting, because one analogy that has been used to talk about facts is money. And now sometimes when people think about money, they think, well, money is the root of all evil. That's actually not what Scripture says. It says the love of money is the root of all evil.
People get that phrase from that.
Yeah,
from
that's
that
where they get it.
Yep.
So if we think about facts like money, if we had a dollar bill or something like that, it's not inherently good or evil. It depends on how it's used. Mm-hmm. So I could share my money, or I could hoard it. I could spend my money on very useful things and donating it to charities, for example. Or I could spend it on very frivolous things and waste it and not really make use of it to promote a healthy life for myself and a sustainable culture for everybody else, right?
Yep.
Same is true of facts, too. I could hoard my information and my knowledge and keep it to myself, or I could share it and try and help other people. I could use my facts to, plot evil schemes and hurt other people, try and get revenge on them, for example. Or I could use my knowledge, let's say, of you, and I could say, well, I know Curtis, and I bet he would like this kind of gift for Christmas.
Yes.
And so I'll use my factual knowledge to actually help bring you some joy.
Yeah, and send all Christmas gifts to me to the Swedenborg Foundation, Westchester, Pennsylvania. Okay, yes, and it's a great point, and we've all seen living examples of this. There were like political elections. You'll have two sort of polls, and the world is the same, but there'll be very different stories spun on it there. Right. And then also I think of like advertising for prescription drugs or something, and it's like we know what people want to be like, so we're going to show a person who looks like what they want to be, doing things they want to do, and by that try to convince. So there's this potential to use facts, but then again there can be knowledge of the human body and knowing how to help. So
right. So health is another good illustration. Actually, if you think about how we can a certain amount of factual knowledge about your body is very useful. And you can actually use it to promote your own health, promote the health of other people. But to a certain extent, you could actually use it to sort of drive yourself insane and drive other people insane too. If you dwell too much on the information and on the facts.
Easy to do on Facebook. Everybody's posting like, this is how you have to not eat any of this. You have to eat all of this, but you can easily stress yourself to death that way.
Right. Or if you have a certain tendency toward hypochondria, for example. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
If you,
I gotta wash my hands.
If you have when he talks about this assumption, right?
Yes.
You have this assumption that there are germs everywhere, and I have to avoid absolutely. It can and it's. You could say it's a sort of information overload, and then you start analyzing all the information. That's what we call the analysis of paralysis. The paralysis of analysis.
Yeah.
So it could drive you insane, and we could also use it to confirm certain tendencies in ourselves that are not very good.
Yes, and it is such a tricky thing for people to deal with, to not roll down that slope, because technically it's a fact. There are germs, but it's so hard, and your mind can use that to basically say, hey, listen, I'm just looking out for you, but I'm going to drive you insane with all this stuff. And I was thinking that he mentions in this number we were reading that facts can be a means towards insanity, because if you think you know more than other people, you can kind of be cloistered in a way that you're sort of impervious to the opinions of others, and that can actually, you'd actually be better off if you thought you knew less.
Right. There's a great little story in Socrates, in philosophy, about Socrates, because one of his friends, Chaerephon, asks, so who's the wisest person in Athens? He goes to the oracle at Delphi and asks the question, and the oracle says, well, there's none wiser than Socrates. And Socrates says, well, wait a minute. How could this be the case? Because I'm just becoming aware of how ignorant I am. So he goes around and talks to the politicians and poets and craftspeople, and he finds out actually they think they're wise. They think they have a lot of knowledge. But when he questions them, it turns out they actually don't. And so he ends up concluding in a sort of paradoxical way, well, actually, I guess I do have a bit of wisdom, because I'm actually willing to admit my own ignorance and admit when I don't know things.
Now, and I like that you use that word wisdom there, because that's what we're going to be looking at, this kind of the difference between, an accumulation of facts and wisdom here is kind of the core of the show, and that leads us right into our next segment. So thanks for doing my job there, man. Let's look at number 2. All right, so part 2 is called The Gift of Rationality, and that was really, just got to say, the perfect segue into what we're doing here, because Swedenborg, and he spends a lot of time talking about the difference between just accumulated knowledge and wisdom. And so we're going to start dipping into that here. I have a quote to read again from Secrets of Heaven 4156. This is further in the number. It is not the person who is able to reason from facts, doing so sometimes in a seemingly more masterly way than others, who is endowed with rationality. This skill which he possesses is the product of a wholly illusory light. But that person has the proper gift of rationality, who is able to see clearly that good is good and truth is truth, and as a consequence that evil is evil and falsity is falsity. But anyone who looks on good as evil and on evil as good, and who also looks on truth as falsity and falsity as truth, cannot in any sense be called rational, but rather irrational, no matter how capable he is at reasoning. And I'll continue the second part. With the person who sees clearly that good is good and that truth is truth, and conversely that evil is evil and falsity is falsity, there is a light flowing in from heaven and enlightening the area of his understanding and causing reasons which he sees with the understanding to be just so many rays of that light. The same light also gives lights to the facts. The same light also gives lights to the facts so that they serve to support those reasons, besides imposing order in the heavenly form on such facts. People, however, who stand opposed to good and truth, as do all who are leading an evil life, do not allow that heavenly light in. Instead, they take delight solely in their own illusory light, whose nature is such that one sees things rather like a person in the dark who sees streaks on a wall, and is deluded into making all kinds of shapes out of them, when yet they are not shapes, for as daylight falls on them, they are seen to be merely streaks. So that was long. I'm sorry, everyone. But I wanted to include the whole second half because of this whole thing about light. And so at the end, he's sort of talking about, like, you know, if it's dark, you can kind of, oh, is that, and when it's light, you can tell, oh, that's nothing. So there's a lot in there that he talks about, but it's sort of getting at this, okay, there's accumulation of facts like money, as you said, but really what matters in terms of wisdom is, are you using those to understand clearly what's good and true?
Right. And it's interesting because like you said, he makes this point that wisdom is not just about accumulating all this stuff, just like being truly wealthy or truly rich isn't just about accumulating money. It's about your use of it, and are you promoting what's good and true in society. Because take, for example, the show Jeopardy! Yes. Jeopardy is a kind of quiz show. It tests contestants' memories. And a little while ago, IBM, I think it was, built a computer.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
And they had the computer play against real people, and the computer won.
Yep.
which actually, some people are really disappointed at that. But if we look at it from a spiritual perspective, I think one of the lessons to draw from that is that you and I are important and valuable not for the sake of our memories.
Right.
Because we can have machines that will know or remember lots and lots of things, and be able to give us answers very quickly. In fact, maybe even more quickly than you and I could right here and right now.
And think of where we'll be in 50 years, 100 years. So
yeah.
They could be doing this show.
But the thing that you and I have is that a machine doesn't necessarily have, is that we have the ability to reflect upon our ends or our purposes and how we should use the knowledge that we have. And like Swedenborg says, to be able to see that good is good and truth is truth, and direct our lives and help encourage other people to direct their lives to those ends.
Yeah, and isn't it true? There used to be, they would have these sort of debate courses, or where like, to do well in it, you'd have to defend both sides of an issue really skillfully, and that was seen as like a hallmark of, you've got good wisdom. But Swedenborg spends a lot of time saying that to be able to defend something clever, to win an argument, that's not wisdom. Wisdom is knowing which side of the argument is actually right.
That's right. Yeah. And that goes all the way back to ancient Greece and the distinction between the philosophers, the lovers of wisdom, and the sophists, or the sophisters, the people who called themselves wise, who would come into town and teach you many facts. And, are they true facts or false facts? It doesn't matter. You just need to be able to use these facts to win an argument, and teach you how to make the weaker argument look stronger and the stronger argument to look weaker. Yeah, but what's the real truth of it? Well, it doesn't matter, because life is about getting ahead, looking out for number one, right? And so the lovers of wisdom, the philosophers, they were the ones that really thought, no, there is something good out there. There is something true out there. And we need to work toward that. We need to open up our minds and exercise our minds to find that and live that as best as we can.
Because at the core of it, somebody who is manipulating an argument just to get what they want, there might as well not be any knowledge at all. All they're saying with all these complex arguments and everything is just, I want that.
Yep.
Whereas if you are loving what's good and true, you're actually looking towards something that can accomplish more as an end.
That's right.
So let's take a look at our third one, which is about the wisdom of life. And so, to Swedenborg, wisdom and life are pretty much inseparable. That you can't just be you can't just sit and think about it and become wise. There has to be some living there. So let's hear him say that. This is from his book Married Love 130. What is wisdom of life? It is in a comprehensive summary, it is this: to shun evils because they are hurtful to the soul, hurtful to the commonwealth, and hurtful to the body, and to do goods because they are beneficial to the soul, the commonwealth, and the body. So he's telling us what wisdom is, and it almost has nothing to do with information. I mean, it's a way that you live, and it has a moral underpinning.
Yes. And what's interesting is in the same book, he has some stories about actually ancient Greeks and philosophers that he meets in the spiritual world. And the full title of the book is actually The Delights of Wisdom That Pertain to Married Love.
Yeah.
And the Pleasures of Insanity That Relate to Adulterous Love. Yeah. So it like some of his other books, like Divine Love and Wisdom.
Always love and wisdom together.
Yeah, there's always love and wisdom together. And this one in particular, I think, is very practical. And it goes back to a debate that it's no wonder that he talks about the ancient Greeks, because the ancient Greeks themselves had a debate. Is there wisdom that's just about sort of theories and it's very abstract and about understanding the causes of things? Or is wisdom more about application? So is wisdom about how to do things, like a craftsman is able to make a boat or a shoe very skillfully.
Kinetic intelligence, some people will talk about different forms of athletic intelligence.
Or eventually the philosophers also talk about a phronesis, or a practical wisdom. It's really about how to live a virtuous life. And that doesn't mean make yourself necessarily better than everybody else, but it means you see what good is, and you don't just see it abstractly like, oh, I have a theory about the good. It's no, I'm here with you or with other people. It's a particular situation, and I can see what's true, and I can actually apply that to help strengthen good relationships. So it's today we would call it a wisdom about people and how they work. Not people skills almost sounds a little too manipulative.
Right.
It's more, well, here's one of the radical things that I think Swedenborg says about wisdom that I really haven't seen in other places. And that is, he says, inside true wisdom is innocence. And that's new. That's different.
You think this is somebody who's seen it all,
Yeah, and it's not innocence as you might typically think about someone who's lived a very sheltered, life out in a cloister somewhere, or the innocence of a baby. It's not the innocence of ignorance. He talks about the innocence of wisdom. So you've lived a full, active life. You've been doing all sorts of things, but within your good judgment, within your prudence, there is a continual recognition that any light that you have on subjects and how to help people, it's really from God. It's really from the Lord. And the whole point of life is to help people grow spiritually. And
that is wisdom, because that is valuable. I mean, that he says that's what carries over when we transition out of this life, that is what is beneficial to society, as he was saying in that quote, that that's a precious stone, because there's use in that.
Yep.
So and that's what it gets back to. In our second quote, the rays of light coming in, and to recognize, okay, I'm like Socrates was, that I'm not that wise at all, but I'm receiving it. It's just kind of what some people would call waking up to what's really happening.
Yeah.
All right, so I'd love to hear what all of you think about this, and we're going to get to your questions and comments right on the other side of this break, so stick with us. welcome back. We're in the question segment, so if you want to participate, just write a question or comment wherever you are, Facebook, YouTube, we'll grab it, and we'll try our best to say something intelligible surrounding it. So let's take a look at our first one here today. This is from Jared on Facebook. Are God and heaven objective realities which are consistent in their form and nature for everyone, or are they subjective and take different forms based on the contents of the person? And I would say both, meaning that the spiritual world that Swedenborg describes has a lot going on in the realm of appearances, as he would describe that. Depending on how much of that light we were talking about is penetrating your mind, you can see things closer to how they really are, or farther away. So many people can be looking at the same kind of spiritual object and yet have a different view of it. However, I do think that there is a closer and closer to seeing something as it really is.
Right.
So things do have some kind of form. So do you have further thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, if you could think of it from a very abstract sort of metaphysical sense in this, the reality of things is somewhat dependent upon your perception of them.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, just as things in the natural world are somewhat dependent on our perception of them. But there is also an element of reality that is independent of our perception of them, and that's put there by God. If you think about from a moral standpoint too, we're talking about wisdom and love. Love and wisdom can't be entirely just subjective or relative to an individual or a group. God puts boundaries on what counts as good. He puts boundaries on what counts as true, even though there is some room, some latitude in terms of both goodness and truth or love and wisdom for us to, make them our own and feel our own and have our own perspective on them. Yeah,
and you can tell, like there are things that are, you can just tell that this is a really bad thing to do to someone.
Right.
And even if there was a whole country that popped up that said that's fine, you would still say, man, that's mean. You can't do that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what that is. Great question, Jared. Thanks very much. Next one is from Drive By Poet on YouTube. What are truth and falsity in this context? How does Swedenborg say a person should use his or her rationality to determine if something is truth or falsity? A great question.
This is a very good question.
These are how do you in Swedenborg is all about thinking, putting things through your rationality machine. That he'll often in his works urge the reader to think this through for yourself. Can't you? So his is, as I understand it, is sort of a fusion of kind of what he would call the affirmative principle, like take things from Revelation, the principles of God and of some principles of morality, and then but from once you sort of have that as a guiding light, think things over and what makes sense to you and what kind of lines up with what you feel like is there.
Right. And Swedenborg, and I think lots of people too, have a combination of strategies, let's say, to help them figure out what's true. Swedenborg, as do we sometimes rely on our experience. Sometimes our experience is idiosyncratic, meaning we can't totally rely on it just alone. So we often check with other people to see if they have the same experience or a similar experience.
Like I'll say, this show went really well tonight, and my crew is like...
So that's one touchstone, experience. Another one is reason.
Yes.
So if you've studied critical thinking or a bit of logic, and so somebody comes along and says, hey, well, I think it's a good idea to do X, Y, and Z. And you're sitting there and you're thinking, well, wait a minute. If we did X, Y, and Z, that would lead to this other consequence. Yeah. And that is contradictory, or that just doesn't make logical sense. Well, then there's something wrong with it. There's got to be some falsity in there somewhere. Yeah. And then another touchstone is revelation, I would say. The written word, the Bible, the Holy Scriptures. And I would say the last one is also intuition or perception. Swedenborg talks about the soul, and that there is a level of unconsciousness above our consciousness. And God, with that light, is constantly flowing in there and stirring our soul to try and help us figure out what's true.
Yes, and it's funny because we could talk on any of those points for a very long time.
Yes, we could.
Like you mentioned Bible, but Swedenborg has this whole internal sense to it. Like the Bible says, don't eat shellfish. Is that wisdom? But the way he looks at it, this is all, as we're going to look at in a few minutes, the correspondence segment, there's this whole other meaning to it. Also, another thing I think of is this kind of the pairing of love and wisdom, or good and truth, as he's saying, so that even if something is accurate, if it's being used for evil, he would consider that false. Correct. And that there's a sort of extra dynamic there of what's one way to tell if something's true, is it doing something good? So anyway, we could go forever on that. So space and time, we'll have to cut that one off. Let's see if we have another question here. This is from Fuzzman57 on YouTube. I always thought I had a deeper wisdom from when I was younger. I've heard of old souls, which could explain it, but what I don't get is how a soul can be old if there is no time in higher dimensions. So, yeah, I've heard that term before, and a lot of things can kind of contribute to people having that sort of vibe, which is, life. If you have a lot of life experience at a young age, you've experienced, suffering, these kinds of things that can sort of open you up. Some people are just more naturally prone to inquire about the things that we would consider deep. Although everyone, I think, has depth in different areas of life. Some are just more obvious than others. But as we were talking about, the way I would see it from Swedenborg is that all wisdom is from God. I mean, this is the light coming in, and that we're all built differently. And if you initially have something is open up there that's letting some way, or you're connected to heaven in some kind of way that gives you something about that. But so those are my initial thoughts. Right.
That's good. Maybe we should be clear too that Swedenborg does not believe in transmigration of the soul or reincarnation.
Sure.
However, I think an interesting angle when you're talking about wisdom, one of the images that frequently comes to mind for people is the thinker, let's say.
Yeah, we had that in one of our graphics.
Or just an old, hairy man.
Yeah.
Okay, now if we stop and think about the symbolism of that, age is a symbol of wisdom. Mm-hmm. Hopefully the innocence of wisdom and old age, where you have learned the lessons of life and have grown spiritually, and now can pass that along to others. But also the hairiness of an old hairy guy means intelligence and knowledge.
Yes, the correspondences. Again.
Yes, correspondences, and then also a man. A man is a form of understanding or of wisdom. That doesn't mean, by the way, that Swedenborg thinks that women don't have wisdom. Just the opposite. He thinks they do have wisdom. And in fact, men are not very wise unless they are joined to, married to a wife, to
there's
women.
So much nuance in, like he'll talk about different things could be a symbol for different stuff. You see it, like, okay, if we're going to, you have some craggy old man that's like sitting on a perch high up in a mountain, you just think, oh yeah, that's a wise old man.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily, it's not only that guy's wise, but he's just a symbol for this sort of quality that you can't really see directly, which is wisdom. So, okay, we're going to put this up as a symbol of it.
Yeah. So old soul might not have to be taken literally.
Sure. Yep.
The old part.
Yep. Oh, right. The old, yes. No time and space. Okay. We just there got back around to the question. All right. So much to be discussed there. Okay. Thanks very much for that. I think we have another one here. This is from Susan. She said on Facebook, "Wisdom is different than learning. Heavenly wisdom is the best." It certainly seems like there's and that Swedenborg, part of his journey was to discover this, because he was one of these, like, I know a ton of facts.
Yes.
Like very academic, very highly praised in a lot of fields, and reading some of his journey, his dream journal and diary of spiritual experiences, he had to kind of come to this realization that, I'm not better than everyone, because I know actually this stuff is like feeding the flames of my pride,
right?
And that's the problem. It's not being smart. I don't need to be smarter and smarter. I need to get off my high horse.
I mean, he was an extremely learned person, and it's interesting because sometimes he has very strong criticisms of the learned, which he would know since he was one. On the other hand, he's not against education. Not that all education has to be in school,
right? But
it also depends on the kind of school that you attend. I mean, there are schools that do encourage, I would say, wisdom. There is a belief in the soul. And there's an understanding that everyone in the classroom is working to try and open the mind so that it does receive light from above, and that there is a platform for the wisdom of life, not just for memorizing a bunch of facts or spitting back information on a test.
Yeah, so that kind of brings us back to the first quote we saw, that facts are either a means of becoming wise or of not becoming wise. That they certainly can do a lot of good but what you first got to get straight is this wisdom of life that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Like, are you going to use your powers for good? If
Yeah.
so, go for it. Learn.
Yeah.
A lot of people come back from near-death experiences with this hunger to learn, and they'll enroll in post-grad education or something. So that's great. However, it doesn't matter how much work you do on the kitchen if the foundation is cracked.
Right.
The house is in trouble. So if you're being led by a love of your own intelligence or something like that, you'd probably be better off not knowing much but fixing up that. So I think that's what. Yeah, but definitely he is saying that facts and learning can do a lot of good. So
Yep.
All right, do we have another one? Okay, we're gonna take it. Is Cynthia on Facebook have this strength to be wise and the wisdom to be strong? I think we're going to leave you guys with that sentiment. Thanks, everybody. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come back with our correspondences segment as we were talking about it. So. All right, so as we do every time at this time, we're going to go into our correspondences segment, and we talked a little about correspondences. And if you're just this is your first time seeing the show, you might say, "What is correspondence?" It's not a very wieldy word, and it's not one that you're going to hear in conversation, but yet it's all over Swedenborg, and it's this complex concept that I understand. Look how wise I'm being by admitting this. I understand very little of it, and it is essentially that everything is a symbol for something deeper. Everything we observe in this physical world is a symbol of something deeper that's in the spiritual world, and from there further and further in. And we talked about the symbolism of an old man. We talked about the symbolism of the thinker, all kinds of things. Now we're going to take a look at the symbolism or the correspondence of clouds. And clouds come up a lot. Obviously, they're a pretty ubiquitous feature in life, but they come up a lot in Swedenborg, and with different sort of meanings depending on their nuances. Yeah. I'll say that he talks about in the spiritual world. Swedenborg. If this is your first time, let me say Swedenborg had all these out of body experiences where he said he could experience the spiritual world and go travel there. That's a whole other episode. But he would see these people there, and when they didn't have wisdom on an issue, a dark cloud would be over their head. He could perceive a dark cloud over their head, and as it thinned out, that was a symbol of them becoming wiser. So did you have a few other thoughts on clouds and their meaning and light? Yeah,
it's fascinating because even today, too, we use terms that I think represent those correspondences that have come down to us even in our language. So we talk about how, how's your thinking today? Well, it's sort of foggy. Mm-hmm. Well, fog is a low-lying clouds, okay? Yeah. And so I'm not seeing things clearly.
I can see clearly now. The rain is gone. I can see all obstacles in my way.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, and that brings us back to wisdom, because the root meaning of the term wise means to see, to perceive. And so, on the other hand, if you didn't have, if there were no clouds in the atmosphere at all, so no water vapor, the light would really hurt your eyes, and it would be scorching things. Mm-hmm. So we need some protective layers to filter that light. Just so in our minds, we need to a certain extent our own concepts, our own ideas of things, so that divine light that's coming through, it does get filtered. Another way to understand the natural world corresponds to the spiritual world. So if you look at it from the subset of where our planet is in the solar system, there's an analog between the Earth and the sun and God and a human being. Right. So everything that
The biosphere needs that to survive, right? So what the role of clouds, as you were mentioning, is that, okay, they sometimes are blocking it out. If they're always there, it'd be a problem, but they mitigate it, and they make it so it's possible, and they also can bring rain. So what we're going to be seeing in these images here, we're just going to look at a few for about just under a minute, and they are a picture of sky and clouds together, and you can kind of see light interacting. So this is something about the divine coming into the concepts that are suited to our minds, and in a way that we can handle without it being too scorching. So just with those thoughts rolling around in your head, take a look at these and just see what comes to you. And I can't just call up this state of mind at will, but there are times when I feel like, I'm kind of looking at things in terms of symbolism and correspondence. And a couple times I've had that on an airplane where I'm looking at these clouds and I'm like, this is amazing. This is like a portrait of the mind. And anyway, it's brief, but it does happen. Everybody, thank you so much for hanging out with us today. If you want to help this show grow and prosper, please consider making a small donation to the nonprofit Swedenborg. Your gift will be matched 5-1 by a generous donation that we received. Just open up the description of this video. There's a link in there that will get you where you need to go. Thanks. Dr. Dan Synnestvedt, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been great to have you, and we hope to have you back again soon.
Thanks for having me, Curtis. I really enjoyed it.
All right, man, and we'll see the rest of you next Monday.